Our family was really musical. So my dad was always in choirs. And as kids, we just sang all the time. And then I started playing a couple of different instruments. By the time I was 12 or 13, I ran across on PBS, they had these music shows on. And one week I heard Gustav Holst's The Planets. And I was just transfixed. I never heard anything like it. And then another time I heard Duke Ellington. And I had the same kind of reaction to the jazz side of that, just wondering, what is this music and how did they come up with this? And from that point on, I just got really serious about it. Started practicing, 3-4 hours a day on top of school. And by the time I was 16, 17, I was pretty good. I was working professionally in Detroit and in other parts of Canada, where I'm originally from, and it just took off from there.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. I am again your host, Mike Hoffman, and today I am joined by pianist, composer, and author, Kurt Ellenberger. Kurt, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you coming on. It's quite an impressive listing of all the different things you've done, both, obviously on the writing end, but, more so obviously in the different orchestras and things that you've, taken part of, over the years. I assume you kind of grew up with that love of music from the beginning?
I did. Our family was really musical. So my dad was always in choirs. And as kids, we just sang all the time. We sang, canons and rounds and folk songs, and it's just what we did. In fact, when I started to play with other kids in the neighborhood, and I realized that that's not what most people do, I thought it was weird. So I just kind of grew up with that, in my background, a lot of singing, and then I started playing a couple of different instruments. And by the time I was 12 or 13, I ran across on PBS, they had these music shows on. And one week I heard Gustav Holst's The Planets, and I was just transfixed. I never heard anything like it, and it just really piqued my interest. And then another time I heard Duke Ellington, and I had the same kind of reaction to the jazz side of that, just wondering, what is this music and how did they come up with this? Because both were just so amazing. It just pulled me in. And from that point on, I just got really serious about it. Started practicing, 3-4 hours a day on top of school. And by the time I was 16, 17, I was pretty good. I was working professionally in Detroit and in other parts of Canada, where I'm originally from. And it just took off from there.
So you said you played a wide variety of instruments. What made it that, your focus was going to be on the piano? Like, what was it about the piano that you fell in love with?
Well, I initially started on accordion, playing kind of folk music. And then I started playing trumpet, and that's what I did professionally was playing trumpet. But I always had I felt the trumpet was limiting. It wasn't the big picture. It was just playing a part. And I was always really interested in, how does the harmony work? How do these instruments all work together? So that really grabbed me, and really what that led me to was the piano.
Well, you are talking to a fellow trumpeter. Well, back in the day, anyway. Yes. Oh, I played trumpet through the beginning of high school. Then, just because of needs, I switched over to French horn through high school.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then at 17, I officially retired from playing any kind of instrument. But
okay.
it was a big part of my life for about 8 years. So yeah, so I can see obviously how you kind of grab onto it. I think the major difference was you had a love for it, which is awesome. For me, I had an enjoyment of it, which is a huge difference. And that's to your point before, where you go to school and practice 3-4 hours a day. I went to school, had band class during the day, and I got home and I don't want to practice. I wanted to do other stuff. So I think for you, it was that the love of it that helped elevate you to the next level.
Yeah, pretty much. It just grabbed me. I don't know why, because I didn't like practicing when I was a kid. But once I got that bug, then it was like, well, okay, I'm going to practice 3 hours a day and see how good I can get. So it wasn't hard work. I just really needed to kind of express that and make that the focus of my life.
I think also being in a house with other people, I think playing a piano is a lot more appealing to the other people that are forced to listen to you than blaring into a trumpet. So I think it's a combination also of they don't want to hear you.
Absolutely. I used to have my mom and sister would say, "It's Sunday. Can you just take a day off?"
Yeah,
And I would say, you know, if I take a day off, I notice it. If I take 2 days off, the other players in the band will notice it. And if I take 3 days
yeah,
off, the audience will notice it. So that was kind of my line. But yeah, it did drive them nuts because, you know, with trumpet, you're doing a lot of slurring exercises and, you know,
yeah.
just stuff that doesn't sound good. You're not playing
Right.
music all the
And
time,
it's
right?
boring. That's exactly right. You're looking at scales. You're looking at all these different things that it's not fun to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly.
So to what extent were you self-taught, and to what extent were you trained?
Oh, I was taking lessons from the very beginning. So that was just part of what we did as kids, both my sister and I. That was just required. You're getting lessons right from the start. And then I started getting lessons from some of the players in Detroit. When I started
Mhm.
getting into jazz, I started studying with
Yeah,
some of those players, which was really cool because a lot of those players were the players that played on Motown. There were like a lot of the
right.
background musicians were there, so you'd go to a gig, and Marcus Belgrave is there, or Johnny Trudell is there, or you know these players that some of them are really well known jazz players
Yeah.
like Marcus Belgrave, but others were
Mhm.
just session players on Motown. So it was a pretty cool scene in Detroit
Yeah.
back in those days.
So back then, when you really got into it, and you started getting these jobs, your first work jobs. At that point, what was your vision for how you wanted your career to go? So you knew obviously you wanted to stay in this music area. You seem to have a passion for jazz, but did you kind of say, okay, this is what I'm working towards, or did you just kind of let the opportunities come to you?
Well, at the time, I thought it was just super fun to be able to make a living playing
Yeah.
music. And I did some touring. I was lead trumpet with a group that toured with Joey Bishop. Went all and up and down the East Coast, stuff like that. Plus dinner theater, that kind of thing. There were just a lot of
Yeah.
pickup work for musicians in those days, and I loved it. But by the time I got my mid 20s, I didn't. It was still fun, and I was making decent money, but I just didn't see myself as a 35-year-old or 45 year
Right.
old scraping together, you know, a gig here, a gig there. Again, the money's okay, but it just wasn't a lifestyle that I was really enjoying very much. And a lot of it was just gig work. You know, you do
Yeah.
the occasional, concert, artistic concert gigs. Those happen, but a lot of it was just, you're doing weddings, you're doing parties, you're Christmas
Yeah.
stuff. It's it's not glamorous, and I just got kind of tired of it after 10 years. When you're 17, it's kind of fun, and
Oh, yeah.
uh, but when you're 27, I'm just not sure I wanted to keep doing that for very much longer. So I
Yeah.
went back to school.
Yeah. So
Yep.
you went back to school, and what were you studying in school? Like, what was your specific major?
Well, I didn't want to do performance because I
Okay.
thought I'm already a professional performer.
Yeah.
Why am I doing a degree in performance? And my bent was always kind of more theoretical and academic. I really liked music theory a
Hmm.
lot, and I was also a composer. So I went the theory composition route rather than the performance route. But you're there and you're performing anyway. So
Right.
but I didn't feel like I needed to do a degree in that. I just studied privately or studied at the doctoral level. I studied piano, classical piano. So that gave me enough of that, while the rest of my time was devoted to the kind of the more intellectual academic
Mhm.
pursuits in music theory and composition.
So then you get this additional training, you get out of school, and then what's next for you?
Well, I got my first job in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. I taught there for a year, and that led to my second job, which was in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, just north of the Montana border. Kind of an isolated area, but really beautiful, right close to the Rockies. But it was so far from family back in Canada, Detroit area, that I was looking for something closer. That it wasn't a 30-hour train ride to get back.
Sure.
So a job opened here in Michigan at Grand Valley State, and I'd been up in this area in the west part of Michigan many times as a performer with different bands from Detroit, and I loved it. It's beautiful terrain, close to the lakes, rivers, hilly, which is not what Detroit is like. Uh,
Right.
and I got the job here, and I taught here for 26 years and just retired last month, actually.
So was teach so your love for music, I think, and you see it with professors and teachers, the ones that are really passionate about what they're teaching make the best teachers, obviously, because they really want to share their knowledge, and so forth. You know,
Yeah.
how now looking back 20 something years later, do you feel about your time as a educator versus
Mhm.
your time as a performer? Like, how would you compare the two?
Well, my performance career came to an end about 2007. I've got a
Mhm.
genetic condition with my hands, and I just had to stop.
Okay.
So I was commissioned by the Grand Rapids Symphony to arrange Vivaldi's Four Seasons for ballet, orchestra, and jazz quartet. And I
Hmm.
thought this is a pretty good pinnacle to go out on. And so
Of
after that,
course.
I stopped performing. Um, with the teaching and performing, with the teaching, I love teaching. I mean, if I wouldn't have retired if I could just kept teaching.
Right.
It was a lot of the other stuff that sort of gets to you after a while. But I just loved going into that classroom every day, and I just thought it was such a privilege for me to be able to share my passion with these bright young students. And yeah, I think you're right. When that passion is there, it's infectious. The
Yeah.
students get it, even if they're not into the topic. They're getting
Mhm.
that passion from you if you feel like that about the subject, which
Right.
I certainly did. So for me, it was just a fabulous way to spend my life sharing what I'm into with these students. And then after the performing stuff ended, I started a blog, which I didn't really even know what that was back in
Yeah.
2008 or nine, whenever it was. And it was really strange because all of a sudden I was getting quoted. I think the first quote was in the Minneapolis Star or whatever the newspaper is there, and I thought, wow, maybe I'm onto something here with this. So I kept writing. I entered the Carnegie Hall Arts Blogger contest and got pretty far up until they kicked the professionals out. And then I was contacted by Huffington Post. They said they wanted to publish all of my blog stuff. So a second career just kind of opened up for
You
me,
kind of
and
fell into your lap. Yeah.
yeah, and it's been really great because it's led me to places and interactions with other people that I wouldn't have gotten to had I just kept playing. So that was a nice switch for me, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So talk about the writing side of what you did, both the blogs and you've done a bunch of other things. So really, there's two aspects of your writing. You've written music, and now you're
Hmm.
kind of writing words. So kind of talk about those two aspects of your career.
Yeah, so with the writing, I've always really enjoyed bringing disciplinary information to people that aren't schooled in the discipline of music. And a lot of the stuff that I've written about actually came from questions from students. So, like years and years, students at Christmas time would ask, or November, December, when they start playing the holiday music, they would say, why does so much Christmas music sound jazzy?" So I'd give my answer, and then they'd ask again the next year, and again the next year, and finally I thought, I need to really flesh this out.
Yeah.
I need to write a paper about it. So I get these ideas from students. So you're
Mhm.
bringing, okay, why is Christmas music so jazzy sounding? Okay, I write an article about it, and I try to make it understandable for someone who's interested, but is also willing to stretch just a little bit in terms of the music
Yeah.
jargon and the disciplinary stuff. So that's really where I feel it's been kind of my sweet spot for me, which I really enjoy doing. The challenge of doing that is fun for me.
And it's great because you kind of already have your sounding board before you do it. So you're getting your ideas from people who have a genuine interest in the question because they've already asked you the question, as
Yep.
opposed to you writing about something that you think would interest people, but maybe no one cares about it. You think they care about it, but they don't. So in this situation, they care about it because it's a question that you're repeatedly getting.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I've tried to focus my writing. Like another one is students would say, "Why are minor chords sad? Like why do we hear minor keys and minor chords as being kind of sad?" So I would answer, but then it was another one of those. I really need to flesh this out. I think there's an article here, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to do my research to really prove that what I'm saying has some basis in evidence and fact. So that's been a lot of it.
So now that you've retired from teaching, obviously you're still, at that age where there's a lot you can obviously give. How do you want to spend the next chapter of your life, from a musical perspective?
Well, from a musical perspective, I'm not sure how much I'm going to do. I basically will do commissions if I get asked, but that doesn't happen very
Sure.
often. So from a musical part of it, I'm really not sure because I don't perform anymore. So that would
Yeah.
be mostly writing. But really,
Hmm.
what I'm doing right now with you is kind of one of the things that I'm exploring is bringing these things that I used to bring to my classroom, but
Yeah.
bringing that to a wider audience and sharing, again, sharing that passion for music that I have.
Yeah. So since you have obviously many years of wisdom, I'm going to ask these from a few different perspectives. So, like in terms of advice, so if you were kind of right now giving advice to you, and let's break it down to your 10-year-old self, maybe your 25-year-old self, and your 40-year-old self. And obviously knowing where you were at those points, where as a 10-year-old you're just playing, to get better. As the 25-year-old, you said you're kind of doing all these gigs, and then
Yeah.
as a 40-year-old, where you're kind of established in your career. Would would you give any advice that would be different from what you were doing at the time, looking
I
back now?
I don't think so. I think the advice is kind of what I did is listen to that voice inside of you that's saying, I think I should do this. And if you're really convinced about it and you're really passionate about it, then go that direction and don't stick with one thing, right? I was doing one thing when I was 13, which was playing trumpet. But then by the time I was 20, I switched because something told me that's not the road for you. And I already had keyboard ability with the accordion, so I switched to piano. And
Right.
and a lot of people said, "Well, you're crazy. You can't do that at the age of 20." And I said, "Yeah, I can. I can do this."
Right.
So I think listening to that voice inside of you that says, "Yeah, this is the direction you should go in." Don't discount that. There's something kind of intuitive there, that you should listen to, and I'm glad I did because it got me into so many different areas of life, which kind of reflects I think my interests are very interdisciplinary, and that voice was always pushing me into those different directions. So that would be my advice to anyone at any age: is
Yeah.
listen to that because there's something there.
Now, I've talked to a bunch of musicians, during this, the podcast platform, and many of them say that to be an effective musician later in life, or to be a composer, or someone who's leading an orchestra, that they think one of the big benefits to them was having played several different instruments and not just being on one instrument. So obviously you focused on two instruments for most of your career, and I'm sure you probably dilly dallied with some others, along the
Hmm.
way, just for whatever reason. For someone who knows they want to go into music, so I'll kind of ask the same question I asked before, but a little differently and a little more specifically. Would you encourage them to play a bunch of different instruments early on, or kind of get one, and if you enjoy it, just really kind of hone your skill on that one?
I think it depends on what you want to do in music. I think if you're thinking about doing any composition, then you should play some other instruments, right? Because on the trumpet there are certain things that are going to feel good, right? When you play them, you can really lay into it and make it happen. And there are other things that don't feel good on the instrument, right? So if you're playing a B flat trumpet, you're probably not going to be real happy in the key of G flat because the instrument is just not tuned for that. But if you're in the key of B flat, you're good to go, or a key of C or key of G, it works really well. So every instrument is like that. Every instrument has idiosyncrasies that you should know about if you're going to write for that instrument. Because when you write for someone and it's fun for them to play it, then they're going to play it better. So, but I also think, like for me as a trumpet player, focusing on melody, focusing on a single note line helped me when I went to piano because I thought more melodically, I think, than maybe other people that don't have that background. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you bring a mindset from one instrument to the other one that you don't even realize. But I remember people saying to me, well, when I was playing piano, they said, "Yeah, those are kind of like more horn lines than piano lines," and they liked it. So, and I didn't even realize that. It's just that I was I was
That was
brought
what
up,
your mindset.
pl-
Yeah.
yeah, playing trumpet. Yeah, so definitely get your hands on some other instruments. You don't have to be a pro at them, but just kind of know what it feels like to to play a trombone and go from a low C to a B flat. How does that feel? How quickly can they do that, and what does it feel like in the embouchure to do that? So I think it's really important for players to or composers for sure to have a feel for what those instruments feel like for the players.
So you've been doing this obviously a long time, and obviously with any industry, technology and improvements, have always enhanced things. The production or the design of pianos over the last 40 years or other instruments, the as technology grows, I'm sure they're built in a different way, different quality. As a as an expert piano player, for lack of a better word, have you noticed either an improvement or maybe, in your opinion, a step backwards in terms of, just say, a piano that you're going to play today versus one that might have been in existence 40 years ago?
I think the gold standard is still the Steinway, and there are a
Steinway.
couple of other European brands that are kind of at that level. I don't think there's been that much improvement, technological improvement with those, because I think Steinway just hit the mark, and everyone
They got it
else
right.
was trying to repeat that, and that happened somewhere in the mid 1800s is when that became
Wow.
finalized. Before that, pianos were all kinds of shapes and sizes. They were kind of tinkering around to figure out what the best design is, and
Yeah.
that kind of got solidified in the mid 1800s. There have been, I think, genre-wise, there have been changes made to some of the pianos, even the bigger ones that have gone a little brighter. They're looking for a brighter tone, which is more of a pop music thing, a rock and roll
Yeah.
thing, rather than that rich, deep Steinway kind of sound. But other than that, the piano was invented in about 1710. So prior to that,
Right.
they were we had those other keyboard instruments, and it took about 150 years for them to figure out how to make it. But since then, I think everyone's still shooting for that 9 foot Steinway concert grand kind of sound.
Yeah. So if you could give me this answer, assuming you're talking to an idiot, and obviously in this situation you very well could be talking to an idiot, what makes a Steinway versus another piano? Because let's face it, if I go into a store and I just dilly dally on a piano's a piano. Now, clearly, for
Yeah,
someone in the industry, nothing could be further than the truth from that statement. So, in simple terms, what makes a Steinway a Steinway?
it's sound. It's the richness of the sound and the ability of the instrument to have many varying degrees of volume on the notes, and each one has a rich character to it. So I think that's what it is. It really is the tone and the richness of that sound and the depth of expression which you're getting because you can make every note a slightly different volume, which we call touch.
Mm-hmm.
Voicing the highest note louder and those other voices softer, that creates such a rich and beautiful tone that just it's rare to have that matched by any other instrument.
So, they have those taste tests where, I can give you a Coke and a Diet Coke or a Pepsi and can you taste the difference? If
Yeah,
I were to play right now five different pianos, play the
yeah.
exact same thing on five different pianos, would you be able, not necessarily the exact brand, but would you be able to pinpoint, or at least to a relative level, what kind of piano, or specifically a Steinway, just from the sound?
I think I'd be pretty close. Yeah, and you'd have to have the same size for each one, right? So
Oh, of course, yes.
if you had a 9 foot Steinway and a 5 foot Steinway or a 6 foot Steinway,
Yeah,
they're different. They're different
yeah.
instruments, but I do think you can tell. They just have different tones. So like a Schimmel piano, which is also a very high end piano, tends to be a little bit brighter, and the Steinway has a darker sound to it. Of course, you can voice those pianos too. The technician can kind of tinker with that a little bit to change that. But generally, that's generally I think I could be pretty close with that.
So why aren't some of these other companies making themselves Steinways? And I don't mean a name, I meant in terms of sound. If Steinway has such a distinct sound and the tones that you've talked about,
Yeah.
is it just because they can produce these pianos at a lower cost and people are okay with that for the casual players? But I would think if they're so far better, and nowadays how people are always sharing technologies and piggybacking off of others, why aren't other ones coming closer in sound to a Steinway sound?
Well, some of them do. They're just slightly different. And players will, like some players just love the Steinways, others like some of the other brands. So they are very close. They're excellent instruments. It's just my own personal preference is for the darker sound.
Yeah.
Other players will say, no, I really like the Schimmel because it's a little bit brighter. It cuts through a little bit more. But for my preference, I've always really enjoyed playing on those the Steinways, and the bigger the better. But
And the funny
the
thing
other
is, if
ones
you
are,
talk about people who don't know the industry of pianos, like me, I've heard of Steinway.
yeah,
And I think most people who have whatever, I've never heard of Schimmel as a comparison. So to me,
yeah.
I don't, just in terms of, name recognition, marketing, whatever you want to use it, to me, Steinway's probably so far ahead of a Schimmel.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's the oldest, right? It's just it goes back to 1850, so that name is kind of a cultural touchstone. Whereas the others, even though they're very, very good, I would say they're on the same level as a Steinway, but they're slightly different tones. So, like, there's another one, I believe it's an Austrian company called Busendorfer, and it actually has 3 or 4 extra keys from a normal piano on the bottom, and they're black,
Well,
even though they're the white keys. And they claim that the resonance of having those strings there kind of makes the piano sound different. It certainly does sound different from a Steinway, but I don't think those other outside of insider circles, I don't think they'll ever get that kind of name recognition that Steinway has and will likely
yeah.
always have.
So if you're a traveling musician, and let's say a singer, and you're traveling around the country and you're just doing shows in, I don't want to say arenas, because obviously if you're doing a tour, you're bringing everyone with you. But let's just say you're touring in, whatever, small music halls, or you're touring even in nightclubs.
Mhm.
And you play with a piano. And you're even sending out your pianist is traveling with you, but
Mhm.
the piano is not. Is there a big adjustment prior to that show at that new location to make sure you're singing in accordance with how that particular piano might sound?
Absolutely. It's one of the hardest things about being a pianist is you never play on your own instrument.
Right.
Everyone else they bring their own sax. They know how it
Yeah.
works. They bring their own trumpet. But as a pianist, you're very, you're like, okay, what am I walking into here?
Right.
I mean, of course, at the top levels, if you're a Keith Jarrett or a Glenn Gould, you're bringing your own piano with you sometimes, right?
Sure.
Or you're demanding that it has to be a 9-foot Steinway of this type, made between
Yes.
this year and that year. But everyone else is just walking into a minefield. Like, okay, what have I got here? Oh, it's an upright. Oh, it's a baby grand. Oh, it's a 6-foot.
Yeah.
You just don't know what you're getting, and you need time to kind of get acquainted with the instrument, figure out what it sounds like in the different ranges, and then make the adjustments with your own playing in terms of how you have to play the instrument to get the sound out that you want, which changes from piano to piano.
And I guess once you figure that out as the piano player, I think then you probably have to bring in the singer to make sure that works for them.
Yep, yep. And where they can hear you, how loud is the piano? Are you going to have the lid up? Are you going to have the lid down?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different variables there that you have to deal with.
Yeah. And that's something I never honestly thought of until we were having this conversation now. Like I would, you go somewhere, like you don't necessarily think of you're right, the smaller instruments, anyone's going to bring with them. But obviously someone like a drummer, a pianist or whatever, they're going to rely on what's there for the most part.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're having a residency somewhere for 4 weeks, obviously it's a little different to ship in a piano for someone if necessary, as opposed to one night here, 2 nights here, and you're constantly on an airplane.
Yep. Yeah, you're constantly trying to figure out what have I got in front of me tonight, especially if you're touring like that.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing to me about musicians in general is forget the skill they have in playing. It's almost more impressive when I think about the ear, like the ear that they have for the music, that they can pick something up. And, and I've seen it before, and I'm sure you're the same way, that if you just hear a song on the radio or a melody, probably within minutes, if not right away, you can sit at a piano and replicate that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I never had that ability, and again, was nowhere near your level. I couldn't even begin to get the first two notes if I had to go up or down, whether it was a note and a half or whatever. But I did not have the ear to do that. And I find that of all the skills with this to be the most amazing. How you could just listen to something and then your fingers automatically move to that
Yeah.
sound that you hear.
Yeah, so that especially for jazz musicians, that's we develop that skill. I mean, some people are kind of born with that, but
Sure.
most people work at it pretty hard. And for jazz musicians in particular, the way you get that skill is by transcribing. So you put on a Miles Davis record, well, I'm dating myself, but you put the needle on the record, it starts going, and then you listen to four notes and you figure out what the starting note is, and then you say, okay, where did he go? What note did he play next? Oh, it went from an F to a G. Okay, F, G. Okay, what's the third note? And then you write that stuff down, and then you practice those as if they're etudes, as if they're like learning. That this is a pedagogical tool, and you try to copy and sound exactly like that player. So you're doing that for years and years. By the time you get to, you hear some pop music or a melody or whatever, a little jingle, you can instantly, you say, I know exactly what that is. I can just play it back to you. So that's a learned skill that a lot of classical musicians have, but in particular, jazz musicians are really good at that because that's really you can take lessons, but the primary source material is to learn it from the original players. Because then you learn not only what notes they're playing, but you learn where they're placing the notes in terms of rhythm and time placement and inflection and accents, all of that stuff. So that's the bread and butter for every jazz musician who wants to sound like a professional.
Yeah, amazing. So people can find you kurtellenberger.com.
Yep.
And if people want to check out your blog, where can they find your blog? Is it through your website?
It's on my website. Yep. So everything is there, and I'm also on All About Jazz, where I'm that's where all my articles are as well. So you can just go there and punch my name in, allaboutjazz.com, and you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, listen, I really appreciate the insight on this. It's pretty interesting stuff, and wish you nothing but continued success.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. It's been great.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.